Read right now from South Carolina, Republican Congressman Ralph Norman. Of course, it was Congressman Norman who won the seat that was vacated by Mick Mulvaney, went on to become the White House Budget Director. Sir, very good to have you. Welcome.
Great to be here, Neil. Thanks for having me.
You heard these two saying that the markets, as much as they've run up, haven't run up based on what you guys do with tax cuts, whether they materialize or not. That could take some of the pressure off you, I guess. But there are others who argue just the opposite. Where do you stand? If we don't get these tax cuts and it's a Christmas Eve vote and we still don't get them, would you be worried?
Well, we've got to have them. This is not an option. You know, we all know what happened to health care. But with tax cuts, it's something as conservatives who control, the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, now we've got to deliver on it. And I can tell you, from what the president has said that he's supporting, this is a $4,000 cut for average families. I'm a small business owner. I'm a real estate developer. And I can tell you that with one thing along with the write-offs over 5 years, that farmer is going to be able to buy that tractor. That mechanic is going to be able to add a bay to expand his business. And in South Carolina, this is a must. And, for not having meaningful tax reform for 31 years, that's unacceptable. We as politicians need to realize that. And I think we will. And as Speaker Ryan said, we're going to make this happen. And really, we're going to need to stay in past Christmas to get this done.
Would you want it retroactive, Congressman?
Well, I don't know whether that passed the Senate, but yes, I would love it to be retroactive. Because, this is pretty basic. Yeah. And it's time now to deliver on it, which I think we will.
You mentioned the difference between the House and the Senate. They seem to have a lot more rules than you guys do. Prospects of getting cuts through the House seem a lot more promising than in the Senate, where it just takes a couple to put the kibosh on it. Are you worried that that is exactly what's going to happen?
Well, if you look at the past, that's what's happened. But I think it's a new day now. I think, who's to argue with these basic cuts and the basic things that we're going to deliver on? I don't know how a senator can go back to his state and argue that this is not good. This is good for the taxpayer. It's not bad for it's terrible for the tax collector. But again, 31 years of not having any reform. Look at what happened with Reagan. And I heard, before I got on that, the numbers don't show that. But for the last 8 years, we've been at 1.5% growth of GDP. Mick Mulvaney has 3%, has said 3% and greater is what we have to have a meaningful economy and to unleash this country as has never been done for the last 31 years.
We talked about the Senate, sir, and if you don't mind indulging me on this point, I know you're in the House, but one of the big fixations of some moderate senators, established, whatever you want to call them, Bob Corker is among them, who's had his dust with the president on other matters, they have to be paid for and not add a dime to the deficit or the debt, combination of all the deficits. Are you in that camp, or are you willing to accept, at least short-term, higher deficits as more revenue comes in the later years?
I think we've got to accept higher deficits, not that I like them. Right. And I think the president's committed to, after we pass this, to dealing with the debt. And I know a lot of core conservatives are willing. I'm on a task force now that's going to strictly deal with how do we do that. We've got a spending problem, not an income problem. So that's where we'll work on next. But it's got to have these tax cuts now to be able to fill out your taxes on a postcard, which is what we're committed to, is meaningful. It helps everyday Americans. And, for the liberals to keep saying rich versus poor, that's just not the case. I've heard that violin now for the last.
But if the rich end up not getting a tax cut or get entered into a higher rate, not the 35% rate, to sell this as fair, or whatever you want to call it, and get Democratic votes, would you be okay with that?
I don't mind we've got to hit the middle class. I don't mind if some of the things are whittled down. Repatriation we've got to have. We've got to get the money back in this country. The corporate tax rate has got to be cut. The 20%, with Ireland being at 12%, we need to be competitive on that rate. And the others, the cutting the brackets from 7 to 3 is meaningful, and it helps everybody. And again, I hate this rich, poor. you know, that's a divisive term that doesn't need to be in the vocabulary.
All right.
But this helps everybody.
All right, Congressman, thank you very